All right.
Jake, go
All
ahead and
right.
introduce him.
Great. Thank you, Erin. And good morning, everyone. And thank you all for joining this morning. A little different format, obviously, than what we're traditionally used to here, but do hope that you and your families are all staying safe and healthy. My name is Jay Scruce. I'm with the Port Washington State Bank. And Port Washington State Bank is pleased and proud to be able to sponsor Dr. Clark again this year. And thank you, Erin, for coordinating this event, getting the Zoom meeting together here. And of course, a big thank you to Dr. David Clark. He's sharing his time and his talents, sharing his research and his insights with us this morning. And I know that as an association, we've always been big fans of Dr. David Clark and big fans and anxiously await his presentations. But I feel like this year it's more important than ever. I feel like that any information that we can get as far as economically and what's going on in this crazy world will be tremendously helpful, not only for ourselves, but for the clients that we work with. And I'm sure you'll agree, everybody's working with lots and lots of clients these days. And I know our lenders, Dave Mulder, Kelly Lambrecht, Linda Che and Sharon Niesing have been extremely busy, and I know a lot of the customers they're working with were referrals from yourselves. So thank you for your referrals. We thank you for your trust in us. We do promise that we'll do our best in giving yourselves and your clients the 5-star service that they deserve. But enough about that. Let's get to our man of the hour here, Professor Dr. David Clark. I have his bio here. Hopefully it's still up to date, Dr. Clark, but Dr. Clark is Executive Associate Dean and Professor of Economics in the College of Business Administration at Marquette University. He holds a BS degree in Applied Mathematical Economics from the State University of New York at Oswego, and MA and PhD degrees in economics from Binghamton University. His expertise is in urban and regional economics with an emphasis on housing markets. He has published more than 24 papers and studies in academic and professional journals. Since 2001, he has served as economic consultant to the Wisconsin Realtors Association to analyze the Wisconsin existing housing market. So join me in welcoming, thank you again, Dr. Clark, for joining us again.
Well, thank you, Jay. So I'm assuming everyone can see the screen. First slide of the slideshow. All right. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. This is obviously a different type of format. I didn't have to put a tie on today, but you know, I always enjoy the face-to-face. So certainly hoping that next year will be a more traditional presentation. But in any case, you know, we've been through a pretty tumultuous period. We haven't necessarily completely emerged on the other side of this yet, but you know, I think the news coming out of Pfizer that they have a vaccine that's ready to go is definitely welcome news. And so, with that said, I want to talk about, you know, the Wisconsin housing market and where we stand today and perhaps where we're going. So, you know, I gave a presentation in the early part of this year and kind of shared this slide and you know, we just kind of pointed out we really ended on a high note last year. And if you look at real GDP growth, you know, at the end of the year, we were in the longest expansion we'd ever seen. You know, it lasted 128 months, as it turns out. You know, the annual growth in 2018 had been 2.9%. And we were a little below that growth path in 2019, but still in positive territory. And so so things were looking awfully good. We were, in the presentation last year, we talked about whether or not a recession was on the horizon. I think most economists were suggesting that the answer to that was no. That is the immediate term horizon. Clearly no one had the perfect crystal ball though, and some things transpired that changed that conclusion pretty dramatically. So if you look at home sales through the end of 2019, they were looking pretty strong. We weren't in record territory in 2019, but we had very strong sales, and they had been actually very stable for about 4 years. They'd been in the 80,000 plus range from 2016 forward, and prices had been going up at a pretty healthy clip, and that was indication of a couple of things. You had relatively strong demand, and you had very tight inventories, and so clearly the housing market had completely recovered from the significant recession that we saw back in 2007 through the early part of 2009, and then the relatively slow recovery coming out of that recession. So we were in expansionary mode beginning in June of 2009, but we were expanding kind of slowly. That obviously changed once you got into 2012, 2013, those periods. And when you look at prices, by the time we got to 2017, we had completely recovered all that was lost. At least as you when we review this as it relates to median prices. There are more precise ways of measuring that, take into consideration the fact that median prices are not necessarily an apples to apples comparison, because quality of housing can change from year to year. But even those more precise estimates indicate that we really emerged, we really recovered all that was lost by the time we got to 2017. So the picture coming out of 2019 and going into 2020 was a very positive picture. One that we were kind of questioning, well, how long are the good times going to last? But there weren't any significant storm clouds on the horizon. And then everything changed, and literally everything changed almost overnight. The pandemic first started being discussed in January, and in February there were definitely some more significant concerns. The Trump administration closed the borders to China. That was at that time was seen as a relatively radical move, and by the time you got into March, this is what we were starting to see. All right, and some real concerns that this was going to ultimately spiral out of control. You saw global active cases of 335,000, and there were in the U.S. we had about 33,000 of those, about 10%. And so there was real concern that we had to get control of the situation. That led to economic lockdowns, and those economic lockdowns helped precipitate the recession. And so you might look at this and say, well, wait a minute, 2018, 19, and into January 2020, I remember those little bars being a bit higher. Well, we have to rescale this when we look at the magnitude of the decline. So officially, the recession, recession began in February of 2020. All right. And if we look at this picture, you can see that the first quarter, the economy was down 5%. Well, you got to remember the lockdown, the lockdowns really didn't begin until after the national emergency was declared on I believe that was the 12th of March. And so the decline that ultimately took place in the latter part of March, combined with what was a little bit of weakness in February already, led to a decline of 5%. That's a pretty healthy decline. But the decline that took place in the second quarter was monumental. We have never seen a decline like this before because we have never effectively shut down a good portion of the economy for a 3-month period. And that's effectively what happened. And so we had this significant decline followed by a significant bounce, okay? And so one of the conclusions you can draw is if in fact a recession is typically defined by 2 straight quarters of decline, we would expect that a bounce like we saw in the third quarter would be significant enough to pull us out of a recession. Well, you really need to remember that the National Bureau of Economic Research that actually does the dating of the beginning and the end of recessions and the beginning of end of expansions, they look at more than just 2 straight quarters of decline, and then look at more than just 2 straight quarters of expansion when they're making their determination. But with that said, if we look at the fourth quarter, and we're in the fourth quarter now, and so those GDP numbers are not yet available, but a couple of Federal Reserve regional banks actually do something called nowcasting. So what is nowcasting? Well, nowcasting says, okay, we know what makes up GDP. It includes things like investment and inventories. It includes things like consumption. It includes things like government expenditures. It takes into consideration taxes, those types of things. And so that some of that data comes in monthly. All right. And so really all nowcasting does is it reads those tea leaves and says, okay, with 20% of some of these components of GDP in, how is GDP progressing as you get into the current quarter? And clearly those estimates get more precise as you get towards the end of that quarter. So we're kind of in the middle of that quarter right now. And the New York Fed is saying, look, the fourth quarter is shaping up to be to be showing growth of about 2.9%. The Atlanta Fed says, no, we're a lot more optimistic. We think it's 3.2%. So they're in the same ballpark here. Well, why are we seeing much more moderate growth in the fourth quarter compared to the third quarter? Well, these expansions are based upon a comparison to the previous quarter. And so when we say, for example, that in the fourth quarter of 2019, the economy was expanding at 2.4%, that's the annualized pace that if you were to take into consideration kind of seasonal factors and other types of factors, we would, given what we observed in the fourth quarter, we would expect an annual expansion of 2.4%. All right. If when we got into the first quarter, that extrapolates to an annual pace of about -5%. If you got into the second quarter, we're saying that relative to where we were in the first quarter, we expect to be down about 31%. All right. So with that in mind, you're building off of a very significantly lower base in the second quarter, and so it's not the case that we recovered everything that was lost, but we bounced back rather significantly because an awful lot of the economy had started to open up. And yeah, there was a de-densification that took place. There were still people who were working at home. There were still people who were not patronizing restaurants, but there was a reopening that was beginning to take place. The COVID numbers started looking a lot better in the summer, and so we saw a significant bounce. All right, get into the fourth quarter. We're obviously seeing a pretty significant resurgence of COVID, and so the estimates of the improvement in quarter four relative to quarter three are much more moderate, and that's what that would be that would be expected. So, but clearly things have intensified. So if you look at the U.S. number of cases for the entire U.S., instead of being about 335,000, is about 10 million. All right. There's plenty of discussion about kind of the distinction between a case and a test. Are these unique individuals, or are these people who have tested multiple times? All those types of issues are out there. But in terms of sheer numbers, if we had just north of, if we were looking at about 10% of the cases back in March, and we're looking at about 20% of the cases now, certainly things have intensified in terms of the pandemic in the U.S. And it's due in large part to the fact that more people are spending time indoors, and there has been a rather significant reopening of a lot of the economy. So let's look at the housing market in Wisconsin through this lens. So the state of Wisconsin, as you know, I mean, you're the people who are working these transactions all the time. My guess is a lot of you have been awfully busy the last few months. So one of the arguments that the chief economist of the National Association of Realtors made in a conference that we had at Marquette last spring. One of the points he made is it was his perception that the economic recovery was going to be a V-shaped recovery. All right. Well, if you look at the housing market, certainly I think we could argue that the recovery that took place in the housing market was V-shaped. All right. And part of that is because really the fundamentals that we've been observing over the last couple of years haven't changed all that much. Yeah, the unemployment rate went up, and we'll look at some of those figures in a couple of slides here. But and so there was a little tamping down of demand, and certainly for a couple of months, any showing of homes took place was more likely to be taking place virtually than would otherwise be the case. And certainly there were some sellers who said, look, I'm just going to pull my house off the market for a while. I don't want people walking through my home during a pandemic. I don't want to move during a pandemic, and so we're just going to sit tight for a little bit. With that said, as it turns out, we bounced back pretty quickly when we got into June. My own parents sold their home. It had been on the market for about a year in Branson, Missouri. Wasn't a whole lot of activity. We got an offer in June and closed in the latter part of July. We still had people who were walking through the homes. We obviously we're taking some precautions, like making certain that we brought someone in to do some cleaning after the showings that took place on a weekly basis, and the realtor was very careful in the social distancing and wiping down door handles, all those types of precautions. The main point is people were still looking at homes even during the pandemic. It really accelerated when we got into the month of June, and I'm suspecting that's the picture that a lot of you were seeing as well. So what did we see in terms of the bounce coming out of the lockdown period? And so here I've got the figures for 2018, 19, and 20 for each of the months. And so if you look at sales, January and February were on track with where they were last year. March was actually a little bit better. Well, that's not overly surprising given the lag between an accepted contract and when the closing actually took place. So those March sales were probably homes that had an accepted contract in late January, early February. And so we saw a spike there. Once you get into April, you're going to expect to see sales starting to lag a little bit compared to where they had been last year. They didn't plummet, but they certainly lagged, and that's because those closings were probably accepted contracts in February and middle of February through March. By the time you got into March, that the COVID effect would expect to be seen, and then May it dropped dramatically. All right, and so and that's because those accepted contracts would have been taking place in the latter part of March and April, and as we know, there simply weren't a lot of there wasn't a lot of interest in doing certainly face-to-face showings, and I think realtors did a great job. Our realtor in Missouri did a great job of showing things virtually. But at the end of the day, I suspect that most potential buyers want to step foot in the house before they're going to make an offer. They want to kind of kick the tires. They want to see things that perhaps you don't pick up on with kind of the virtual furniture that we had shown in the house, and certainly May sales were down. Got into June, they were down just a little bit. Then we got a big spike in July, a moderate spike in August, a big spike in September. The numbers for October are not officially out yet. Our release will take place in about a week and a half's time. But I can tell you that we had a very nice bounce in October as well. So sales are really strong. You look at the patterns as they relate to prices, with the exception of June, which had a little bit smaller bounce. There were healthy increases in those prices as well. I can tell you that on a year-to-date basis, we were lagging behind in terms of sales. We were lagging behind 2019 through August. In September, we eclipsed where we were in 2019. In October, we eclipsed it by even more. So we are up year-to-date by a little north of 4%. when you look at the year to date in October relative to where we were in October 2019. So, you know, you might look at this and say, what recession? You know, what recession? There, you know, we are charging forward with you know, both guns blazing, as it were. So let's, you know, you invite a dismal scientist to give a presentation. You got to talk about supply and demand, right? So let's talk about the overall economic factors at play. And so you've seen this slide, the slide before. The numbers change a little bit. You'll see some positives and some negatives. The positives are probably a bit more dominant than the negatives. All right. So what the first big positive, but this is just a wonderful picture, right? You look at these mortgage rates, and you know, my first house was here. This is and I got, you know, I bought this in 1985, got a WIDA loan, great rate, 7.75%. Everyone was telling me, you are the luckiest person alive, because they're looking at this rear view mirror here saying, you know, when I bought my first house, you know, I was paying well over 10%. And we know that these peaked out at somewhere in the 19% range. All right. The previous minimum had been 3.35%. All right. And so that was November and December 2012. We just hadn't seen this going back to, you know, first tracking of 30-year fixed rate mortgages on a national level being 1971. We just hadn't seen it go that low. And, you know, those good times didn't last until they did. All right. And so we were above that 3.35% level until we got into April of this year. All right. And so what happened? Well, the Fed got very aggressive very quickly, because when you're going to shut down the economy to the extent that we didn't completely shut down. You know, there was obviously grocery stores did very well, liquor stores did very well, but we certainly saw a significant contraction in the economy. The Fed said, we are taking the federal funds rate, that's the rate at which banks in the Federal Reserve System lend reserves to each other. All right. So if a bank is low and they need to make up some reserves, or they want to extend some loans and don't have the reserve requirement to be able to do that, they go and borrow from other member banks at a particular mortgage rate, and that's called the federal funds rate. They drop the federal funds rate to essentially zero. All right, and so they also indicated that, and not surprisingly, we are not worried right now about inflation. You know, what you worry about is deflation in these types of situations. You don't worry about inflation, and so that you know, that inflationary message combined with the fact that short-term rates were so low led to a consistent downward drift in mortgage rates, and they've been drifting down since January. All right. But we hit new record territory in April, hit another record in May, and then the story repeats itself till the point we get into October, we're at 2.83%. All right. So had back in 1985, if I just waited to 2020, I could have gotten a mortgage rate that was what, 20% of what I paid, about 30%. However, so that's the, you know, that's the continued story that we seem to see here. Employment, you know, if you look at Wisconsin employment, total non-farm employment dropped rather significantly. So compared to where we were last year, total non-farm employment in September, that's the last month that we have data at this point, is down about 191,000 people. Okay, and so that's comparing this number to where we were in September of last year, which is actually somewhere up in this territory. All right, so we shed a lot of jobs, but if you look at the bounce that took place between August and September, and these are all seasonally adjusted data, and so they take out the fact that, you know, we always expect a few more people in August than September as we transition out of summer and into the fall. So we've taken that seasonality out, and we can see that non-farm employment is up about 23,800 people between August and September. This is a typo. This is the evils of cutting and pasting. Sometimes you forget to eliminate a text box. It was from a previous slide. So you can ignore the quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3 numbers. Those are GDP numbers. The unemployment rate. Unemployment rate spiked in Wisconsin to 13.6%. We had been, so this little green dash line, that's the line that defines about 4% unemployment, and that's generally believed to be full employment. And so some people might say, well, why would you ever be at full employment if you still have people that are unemployed? Well, you have people that are unemployed for a couple of reasons. Those who just simply voluntarily separate from their jobs because they find a better deal. There may be a period between the point where they left one job and took another one. And so that's sometimes called frictional unemployment. There are some people who are going to be chronically unemployed because their skills have eroded to the point where they're still looking for a job, but there aren't any takers for the type of work that they're doing. So your classic example of structural unemployment is unemployment related, let's say, to the buggy whip industry in the advent of the automobile. All right, they have these skills. Maybe they were doing a great business, but once the horse and carriage became obsolete, they became structurally unemployed. So you know, when you're in that type of those types of situations, we're always going to see some unemployment resulting from that. But the cyclical unemployment that comes with business cycles, about the best you expect to do is about 4%. Well, we were running actually below that. You know, we were in the 2% range in the state for a while in 2019. It had started inching upward, but we were still below 4%. We were at full employment. Suddenly you had this huge spike, and that has to do with furloughs and layoffs that took place. We spiked a little less than the U.S. Maybe our liquor stores were a lot more busy than those in the other parts of the country. I'm not sure exactly what was going on there, but in general, we have stayed below the U.S. unemployment rate. If you look, the blue line is consistently below the red line with few exceptions. If you look at our history. The unemployment rate in September, though, had already dropped to less than half of its peak. All right, and so in Wisconsin, we have continued to drop. We're at about 5.4% in September. My guess is it will drop even further as you get into October. All right. So the unemployment picture, and it really the unemployment picture really started to improve after the federal government's enhanced unemployment benefits resulting from the dramatic bailouts that were done. Bailout isn't quite the right word, but the enhanced benefits, effectively made it a difficult choice for some people to go to start actively looking for work, or willingly go back to work when you had this enhancer from the federal government that essentially raised your real wage rate to north of $15 per hour. So once that expired in July, an awful lot of people said, "Yep, it is time to go back." And so we've seen those unemployment numbers improve throughout that time period. Let's look at demographics. And so these are a couple of graphs that come from an organization called the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard University, and they put out an annual publication called the State of the Nation's Housing. And so the 2020 State of the Nation's Housing comes out next week. And so the only thing that's published at this point is the analysis that they did for 2018 that was published in 2019. But when you're looking at demographic trends, you want to look at a longer period of time. And both of these slides make an important point. Young people are now creating their own households, and they have been, for the last 4 or 5 years. But when you look at the green bars here, so this is the households headed by 25 to 34-year-olds, and so you can think of this as millennial household formation. This had been really flat, and it increased a little bit, and it had certainly been flatter than the overall population growth of those in this age bracket. So as those millennials were aging, and now the Gen Zs are kind of in that age, or starting to enter that age bracket, those households were growing. I'm sorry, that population level was growing, but they weren't forming households. This is the proverbial living in mom and dad's basement. All right. And so, there's no doubt that millennials got dealt a bad hand in terms of graduating at the exact wrong time, having taken out a great deal of debt, and housing didn't look particularly attractive, even if they didn't have significant debt, because it was still falling in value until you got it. Really, we didn't bottom out in terms of prices until March of 2012. All right, so forming households, even moving into rental housing, wasn't attractive until the economy really started emerging from the recession back in 2013, 14, 15. All right, and the housing market, the housing prices started growing at a healthy clip at that time period as well. All right, so what does this right side show? Well, this is actually showing your millennial and baby boomer populations superimposed on each other. So here's your millennials here. All right, the 35 to 44 range. Some of the millennials are in this period as well. They're looking at projected changes of these over the next 10 years. All right, and so those millennials who are in their late 20s, early 30s over the next 10 years, they're going to move into this category. And so these are the single person households. These are the married without children. These are the married with children. This is everyone else. Okay. These are your baby boomers. All right. And so there's still a big group over the next 10 to 20 years. These are, they are going to balloon the numbers of households in this age bracket. An awful lot of them are going to be single, or married without children. Hopefully the children have left by that time, right? Then the 75 and older is going to balloon as well. So if you look at this time period, in 2018, the oldest baby boomers had just turned 70. But over the next 10 years, an awful lot of them will be in this in this age bracket. So what that says is the number who are in this age bracket are ultimately going to provide the supply of housing that those moving into this age bracket are going to need. All right, the millennial population is a big cohort. That's not to say that the Gen Xers don't have an effect. That's not to say that the Gen Zs don't have an effect, but this is a big block of people. And I'm going to argue that this is actually very good news for suburban housing markets. It's good news for urban housing markets as well, but I think COVID-19 has likely had will have some lingering effects in the housing market for a couple of reasons. All right, fear of another pandemic. It's going to take a while for people to kind of look back at the pandemic and say, "Boy, I'm glad that's over." Because I mean, just look at what was it, History Channel, I think, has launched some series talking about virus hunters, and I'm thinking to myself, boy, that's exactly what we don't need if we want to have a true post-COVID economy, certainly there are reminders that this got really bad very quickly. It could happen again. All right, and so one of the things I think that potentially does, though, is it creates some lingering concerns about living in very densely populated areas. So that's the first point. The second point is there's an awful lot of people who are working remotely. So at Marquette, we are back face-to-face, kind of. What does face-to-face mean? Well, it doesn't mean we have as many people in the classrooms. It means that there are some classes, most classes students are taking are in some type of a hybrid format. All right. When you walk around the building, and I'm in the building 2 to 3 times a week, you walk around the building, there aren't a whole lot of faculty members hanging out in their offices after they teach classes. They come in, they teach their class, and then they leave. And there aren't a whole lot of students lingering around as well. They will find some de-densified areas to work, but it's a different environment. We will, Marquette will go back to something approaching normality. But we'll have a few more online class options as part of our inventory of classes each semester. We will certainly find that some students are choosing to do their full-time studies remotely. All right, and so that's changed. But the main point here is you have more opportunities for remote work. And so that makes actually living in the suburbs a lot more palatable for people who hate commuting. So more options for remote work, concerns over density, combined with the fact that those millennials are in fact getting to that stage of life where they're forming households and having children. And so that increases their demand for space, and that's likely one of the factors that has been fueling the suburban housing market over the last last couple of years, but even more so if you look at the current year that we're in. On the supply side, we've got very tight supplies. If you look at the types of counties that we have in the state, we can think of those as falling into one of three categories. Metropolitan counties, these are counties that are surrounding cities that are at least 50,000 people or higher. Okay. Micropolitan counties, you think of these as smaller towns and cities. So they've got at least an incorporated town or small city that isn't quite 50,000 in total, but it's somewhere between 10,000 and just shy of 50,000. And then you have the truly rural counties. Those are counties that really don't that have population less than 10,000. All of the significant amount of economic activity that takes place is centered around metropolitan counties. So in Milwaukee, as you know, it's Milwaukee, Ozaukee, Waukesha, and Washington counties. Those are the metropolitan counties. There's a broader classification of consolidated metropolitan areas that would also pull Racine County into that, but Racine is its own separate metropolitan area. It's in the consolidated Milwaukee-Racine metro area as well. But you can see that months of inventory, this is months of supply. And if you think of what a balanced market is really right around 6 months of available supply. Okay, so if you looked at the number of homes that are available for sale, and you looked at the average monthly pace of sales for the last 12 months, how many months would it take to liquidate that supply? Well, if it's around 6 months, that's a balanced market. If it's north of 6 months, 7, 8, 9 months, that's a market where the buyers have an advantage. And if it's less than 6 months, that's a seller's market. And so you can see in September of 2020, all of these classifications are now sellers markets. Last year, micropolitan areas were more or less balanced. All right, they hadn't changed a lot from the previous year. And metropolitan areas were sellers markets, and rural areas were buyers markets. We are all in sellers market territory right now. Statewide, we're at 3.7 months of supply. That's extremely tight. All right. And so the sources of supply, again, I showed you this last time because sources of supply really haven't changed a whole lot. There's still those distressed properties, still existing homes, still new construction. So typically I get this data updated by Dr. Russ Cation. And I neglected to send him a note in time to get the 2019 figures. So I scrambled and looked at some news reports from a report that they put out in July of last year of 2019, where they reported that the first half was lower than any previous first half of the year for nearly 2 decades. Well, since I know his data only goes back to 2000, what that tells me is that it's likely that 2019 is probably going to come in below 2018. So we're going to be, and it's likely south of 8820, but a little bit north of 6400 if you were to extrapolate through the year. Foreclosure, we're simply not seeing a big spike in available supply coming from foreclosures. They're really continuing to be in this range here, and probably a little less than at the end of the year, probably a little less than 2018 was. Listings. So from time to time, and this is our September report. From time to time, we'll see a little bit of improvement in new listings, but total listings continue to fall, and that's because the new listings are not high enough to completely absorb all of all of the pending and final sales. And so these numbers continue to go down. These numbers, sometimes they're a little bit up, sometimes they're a little bit down. When we look at October, we'll see that they're a little bit down, but the general picture in terms of total listings, they're down in the 25 to 26, 27% range if you look at the last few months. So not a lot of new inventory there. And then finally, we are seeing some new residential construction, and so these are the number of permits that were pulled. Not surprisingly, so the blue line is single family permits. The red line is all permits, so it includes single family and multifamily permits as well. So the blue line is single family detached. The other ones are condos and larger apartment buildings. They went up. They went down in April and May. Hit bottom single family in May. Hit bottom all permits in April. But they have bounced back, and if you wanted to fit a line to this from 2010 forward, this is slightly drifting upward. All right, a little more volatile in this period here, but again, this was drifting upward. It's kind of plateaued. Maybe you don't want to take too many signals from one or two data points here, but what's clear is tight inventories, relatively high increases in prices are going to continue to put new construction in a positive light economically. So the overall picture, we are seeing very healthy sales in the July through, well, actually September and October are very significant spikes, but in the post-June time period, we are starting to see some very healthy increases in sales and continue to see healthy increases in prices. On a year-to-date basis, we're in positive territory in sales as of September. We're even better when you look at October. Those year-to-date sales jumped to more than 4% up. Median prices are 10.3% up on a year-to-date basis in September. They'll be a little bit higher than that in October. So where do we stand for the future? All right. Being an academic, this is always kind of a good picture to show. This is the economics department. One of the jokes is if you ask 10 economists their opinions about the future of the economy, they'll give you 13 different answers. And so I always like to leave you with a couple of quotes before I launch into what I think is going to happen. So, economic forecasting is like driving a car blindfolded and getting instructions from a person looking out the rear view window. And that's because we forecast the future by looking at the past. You try to discern patterns that you can extrapolate into the future, but at the end of the day, no one has a true crystal ball. And this is a John Kenneth Galbraith quote. There are two classes of forecasters: those who don't know and those who don't know that they don't know. All right. And so, there is always uncertainty around forecasting, and that's why it's a bit risky. So we talked about at the beginning of the presentation the idea that there was quite a bit of speculation that this was going to be a V-shaped economic recovery, and it's one thing to look at GDP growth, and that's the percentage change from the last quarter. It's another to look at overall real GDP, and you can see that this has fallen. We got this bounce back. There seems to, the nowcasting that the Fed is doing seems to be suggesting that this isn't going to continue on this path and bounce back as quickly, but perhaps is plateauing a little bit. Still in positive territory, but probably not going to get into up to the same level that it was in just one additional quarter. So this is simply a set of projections that were put out by an organization called the Conference Board, and the Conference Board is the private organization that puts out the leading economic indicator series. They're not the only ones that do this, but they're the most dominant. And they look at consumer confidence and a number of other indicators, and they do it for the U.S. They look at it for other parts of the world. And so you can see three forecasts. One is their base forecast. And if you look at their base forecast, they're essentially saying, look, we're expecting relatively flat growth, and then it's going to continue. It's going to pick up a little bit of steam in the first quarter. We'll kind of get back to where we were in January of 2020 by the time you get into October. So this is saying that there's growth, but it's saying that's not V-shaped. This V-shaped bounce back is what they were suggesting was going to be taking place as we emerged from the immediate impact of the economic shutdown. What they're suggesting is, and in fact, this actually grew well. So this is based on actual data, not speculated data. But in any case, this is what the path that they really think we're going to take, given the time at which they were making the projections, which was prior to the election. All right. The downside forecast says there's a lot of uncertainty about what if there's a new administration, what its policies will be. It could cause this to prolong a little bit. But then there are other uncertainties, such as, if a new administration does ultimately take office, are they going to have the full support of Congress, or are we going to have a split House and Senate? And then this is the rosy one, and that's where we're going to be able to kind of continue the relatively pro-growth agenda of the previous administration. But they're also taking into consideration the likelihood of a COVID resurgence. All right, this downside forecast was saying, what if there is no vaccine? What if we get these flare-ups that cause selective economic shutdowns? So this is the rosy, this is the pessimistic, this is probably what they think is more likely to happen. So is that a recovery? That's a recovery. Is that V-shaped? No, it was V-shaped for a while. It's not. It didn't continue along that path. So let's look at my last year's predictions first. All right. So here's what I said last time, and this is the danger of forecasting. I'll be honest with you. I didn't see this coming last year. Now, some of you may have. I really didn't. So I said no recession through the third quarter of 2020. Had we not had COVID, I think I probably would have been accurate. That clearly did not. That's not what transpired. I've been expecting months of inventory to improve for some time. That hasn't happened. did we get a little bit in the new listings? Were we seeing some glimpse of some hope there? We have, but it hasn't been consistent. All right. And so I still, baby boomers cannot fight the hands of time. They will continue to age, and those health required or health determined housing transitions will take place. Father time is a cruel taskmaster, and at some point they will move out of their owner occupied housing in a more forceful way. We're starting to see some signs of it, but clearly inventories remain very tight. Mortgage rates will increase. Well, I didn't see COVID coming, so I definitely missed that one. So this is kind of a split decision, but they will remain below 4.5%, and by golly, I'm right there. They're below 4.5%. The unemployment rate will remain below 4%. That didn't happen, but it did outperform the nation. Price pressure will moderate. You can't say that happened. But will continue to exceed inflation. Inflation's is very low right now, certainly less than 2%, and prices are going up at probably about 10 times that rate right now. Sales will be on pace to exceed 80,000. Sales are on pace to exceed 80,000. Sales are on pace to hit a new record. So here's what I'm saying now, but I am providing a caveat, and that's let's assume that we have an available vaccine that starts getting widely distributed in the spring, starts getting rolled out in January, and at least the news on that front is very positive right now. I think that there's a good chance that the recession will be declared over in the fourth quarter of 2020. But I'm going to hedge a little bit and say I think it's going to certainly be over by quarter one of 2021, and that will make it a typical recession in some sense. In the sense that a typical recession has about 11.1 months of contraction. All right, and so we'll be somewhere in the 11, 12 to 13 month range, I believe. Mortgage rates will increase but remain below 4%. Notice I just recycled the one down below, but hedged a little bit and said I don't have to go all the way up to 4.5%. I can go to 4%. I just don't think they're going to increase dramatically. What will cause them to increase more dramatically is if inflation becomes a more significant issue. Median prices will grow at more than twice the rate of inflation. That's about as safe a prediction as you can get. We're going to have tight supplies for a while. Inflation is not going, I don't believe, is going to spike dramatically. Fundamentally, some of the drivers of inflation simply are not significant threats anymore, and that's spikes in oil prices, those types of things. Demand for oil has gone down as cars have gotten more fuel efficient, and there's plenty of people driving electric cars in this day and age, which a good friend of mine in the energy sector consistently points out run on coal and natural gas because that's how most of the energy generation takes place. But in any case, months of inventory will generally improve, but by modest margins. I still think that that those demographic shifts have got to take hold at some point. I'm more comfortable making that prediction going out 5 years than I am 1 year, but I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I think we'll see a little bit of improvement there. sales and median prices, I believe, will be on pace to break another annual sales record by the time we get into 2021. What's really constraining our sales would have been smashing the last record. I think we will beat the last record. We'll beat the record in when you look at sales for 2020. I think they will eclipse the last record, which I believe was 2017. And I think that we will continue to be on a healthy clip through 2021. And then the last one, hopefully I don't jinx them, but I'm still feeling pretty good about the Packers this year. So those are my the presentation for this year. And if you have time for questions, I'm happy to take some of them.
So if anybody has a question, if they want to just put it in the chat box or unmute themselves and ask.
I just want to say thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I always enjoy this this event. Look forward to getting back and having sweet things and coffee in the morning, as opposed to my cold coffee from my own coffee maker.
Right.
Amen.
Clark, I got a question just regarding the single family home permits. As far as, do you think they'll continue on pace the way they are, or do you think they might be a little bit lower because of the increase in lumber prices?
So, the new construction industry has been facing shortages and relatively high lumber prices and drywall prices and those types of things for a while. I think the major reason that they're likely to continue is that prices are going up at a pretty healthy clip, and they can still effectively compete with the existing home prices for trade up buyers. All right. Now, if you look at inventories by price bracket, certainly there's a bit more inventory when you get to those higher priced homes. But even looking at that, you're in a seller's market at everything except the 500 and higher price bracket right now, 500,000 and higher. So what that means is that that's going to continue to put upward pressure on the 300 and higher price range, and that allows someone who's potentially looking at either trading up to an existing home or a new home to say, I can afford to buy a new home at that price range. So I think that we will still have significant upward drift, I guess, is a better way to put it, rather than a significant spike. But I think the growth will be positive, not negative.
I did have a question that I put in the chat, but I'll just ask it if that's okay.
Sure.
With your construction prediction that your slide talked about, I'm curious if you have any information as far as the supply of vacant land that exists in the metropolitan areas.
So I don't track that. An awful lot of the growth in new construction tends to be on the periphery of metropolitan areas, because that's where the land is. That's a good question, and one that I don't have a whole lot of insight as to whether or not we're seeing any type of growth of new construction in areas that are a bit more densely populated. The challenge is kind of lot assembly is the terminology they use, where you might find a couple of lots, but it's difficult to assemble enough to do an entire development in those areas. I think those will likely continue to be in the more peripheral parts of metro areas. That doesn't mean that there might not be some examples where it happens somewhat unexpectedly in a more densely populated area. But I do think that the majority of that development will continue to be towards the suburban parts of the metro areas.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
Dr. Clark, did you, on your least desirable graph, was another national shutdown factored in?
So again, those projections that we were looking at were projections that were done by the conference board. They were taking into consideration the potential of a resurgence of the virus and the implications of that, and that includes shutdowns. So, they can be partial shutdowns. They could be, more significant shutdowns. I do think that state governments are less likely to have the magnitude of shutdowns that we saw in March and April of last year. It was kind of interesting when Governor Evers scheduled his news conference. I was thinking maybe there was going to be some type of a partial shutdown that he was going to announce. I was skeptical that was going to happen, but it seemed to be seemed to be something that he wanted to speak to the entire state about. So I was wondering if that was in fact going to be the case. He didn't do that, and some of the speculation is because that would likely be relatively quickly challenged in the courts, and that in order to do that, he would need to get buy-in from the Senate and the Assembly, and that simply wasn't going to happen. So, and I think that dynamic exists in an awful lot of states nationally. Their tolerance for that, even in the pandemic world that we live in, post-pandemic world that we live in, is quite low, and especially when there is no additional aid package coming from Congress that would soften the blow of having to be furloughed. So I suspect that they're taking into consideration the fact that there can be some slowdowns resulting from this, either voluntary slowdowns, but we're not going to see the magnitude of shutdowns that we saw in April and May, March, April, and May, I should say.
Okay.
I think that's a wrap. Anybody else have any additional questions?
So there was one question as to whether or not you're getting copies of the slides. You can feel free to distribute the slides that I sent to you. There's no problem.
Thank you.
You.
I'll correct that one slide. I actually made a note of it.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Clark. Very much appreciated.
My pleasure as always. Let's hope we're face to face this time next year.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All
Have a
right.
Fun.
right, take care, everyone.
All right, thank you.